So my name is Mike Tango Bravo, and I make wine in Argentina. And I have a small winery and vineyard. And you say, well, what does this have to do with what we're doing here today? Basically, I've been working on the OpenVino project since about 2017. And we're using a lot of different tools to tokenize wine, to do transparency, and to do traceability. So I'll just describe briefly how each one of these work. By the way, at the end of my talk, we'll be doing a wine tasting out in the main room, out on the balcony. And I brought a bunch of bottles. I dragged them up the hill this morning. So, yeah, absolutely proof of work. So please come and have a taste. These are some, we'll do what I call a diagonal tasting. It's a vertical tasting, meaning when we're tasting different years. But these are all tokenized wines. We started tokenizing our wine in 2018, and now we're opening up to other wineries. And basically, most of them starting in Argentina, but talking to wineries in different parts of the world to open this up, and I'll describe how this works. So essentially, we're doing tokenization. We're not doing a non-fungible token. This is just it's a fungible ERC20 token. One token is one bottle of a particular vintage. And this is how we're creating liquidity with liquid. And if you think about it, wine is a super interesting product for tokenization. And basically for three reasons. And I'm not talking about specific like library collection wines. Like there's a bottle that I have from 1964 from Chateau Lafite, and okay, that's a whole different thing. That's NFT collectibles art. I'm talking about the wines that we produce every year in a winery. So the three things that are really interesting for wine to use as a real-world asset for tokenization is built-in scarcity. So when we when we harvest grapes and ferment and make a new vintage, there's only X amount of wine for that, X number of bottles. It's a highly regulated industry in all parts of the world because it's food and it's alcohol, and it also has a lot of cultural attachments. So it's not like you can easily go and make more bottles of the 2018 without committing serious fraud, right? It's a pretty controlled element in itself. The second thing that makes it really interesting for tokenization is that it's a product that requires some time before it's really ready to drink, and it gets better over time, but not infinitely, right? And it's also not linear. And so some wines have could be, from good to great to no longer enjoyable, could be 2 years or it could be 100 years, and there's everything in between. And there's all different kinds of wines that have that. So I went to go visit a winery in Jerez de la Frontera in Andalusia, in the south of Spain, and they had a giant warehouse full of bottles that are 100 years old, right? Sherry has a really long age to it, but a lot of other wines don't have that. And so that dynamic of, is this wine going to be better, has a lot of interesting speculation. And the third thing that makes it super interesting for tokenization, is the elasticity and price, right? You can do 100-point beer, like the world's best beer, and you're not going to get $100 a bottle for it. But people don't bat an eye at paying 3 figures, 4 figures for the top wine, right? So those three things make it really interesting for tokenization. I'll describe how that works briefly. Then we get into the options, the questions of traceability and transparency. In the case of traceability, what I really want to know is who is drinking the wine and what do they think about it? Because today, the way that we evaluate a wine is usually, there's a few ways, but the main way is I send some bottles off to an expert. They do, there's some very famous noses out there. Jancis Robinson, Robert Parker, the classic critics, and Sometimes it's free, sometimes it's not. I send them a bottle, and they're going to open a bottle and have 2 or 3 tastes of 1 glass of 1 bottle, probably in the middle of 200 other bottles that day, and say, this is a 95, okay, and give it some sort of points. That's fine, but it's very anecdotal, it's very subjective, and it's also open to fraud, because who's to say that the bottle that I sent them, with the label and cork and everything, is actually the same wine that you're going to get in the shop, right? So there's a question about that. The other way of doing it is saying, let's do a TripAdvisor crowdsourcing of opinion, and you have an app, and for wine world, it's Vivino is the most popular app, and people could say this is 3 stars or 5 stars and qualify it. The problem with those apps is that you're asking for somebody's opinion and intellectual effort in exchange of nothing, right? And so, like in the case of TripAdvisor, more often than not, people are using that as a way to punish a bad place that they went and not actually making a good review, because what do they get out of it, right? There's very little. So we changed that up around. And then the third part has to do with transparency. And this is really how we change the way that we certify the qualities of a wine. Now, more and more with every product that we're out buying, we're looking for things on the back label. Is it organic? Is it sustainable? Is it carbon neutral? Is it fair trade? Is it X number of qualities? In the case of the wine world, where we have 70,000 plus wineries, so it's a very atomized industry, representing a $400 billion industry. There's also lots of attributes like what grape is it? What region is it from? Is this an oak? Is this winemaker? Is it single vineyard? There's a whole bunch of other characteristics. How do we know that these things are true, that the winery is not lying about it? And how do we solve this problem we call biodigital certification for this? And the problem, basically the alignment problem that there is today, is that if I have an organic winery, which is my case, I planted grapes in 2003 in Mendoza in Argentina. Winery is called Costa Flores. That's the one we're going to drink afterward. Basically, for me to certify, I call a company, a certification company, and once a year, they come out to the vineyard, out to my house, and drink coffee, and say, so, Mike, did you spray any pesticides on your vines this year? And I say, no, I didn't. And I say, oh, great. Could you show us some receipts of stuff that you bought that you need that doesn't include anything you're not supposed to buy? Yep, here's some receipts. Show us a work log of the things you did this year. And I show them an Excel spreadsheet that I put together the night before, and a couple things like that, right? It's pretty easy to do at the end of the day. But the problem is that the certifier wants to give me a yes, because if they give me a no, they lose a perennial customer. Okay, now I'm a tiny boutique winery, nobody cares, they could reject my certification. But if I'm a big winery and represent a large percentage of their invoice, they're never going to give me a no, they're always going to find a reason to certify me, right? And so it means that it's very easy to cheat, it's almost becoming more and more meaningless as we go forward. So those are the 3 problems from the perspective of the winery, the consumer, the supply chain. How do we resolve it? Tokenization is pretty straightforward in this type of a conference. I don't need to explain it. But basically, we harvest the grapes in South America. We're harvesting in March. April, we're doing our fermentation, following a process that we've been doing for the past 10,000 years. So the end of April, we know how many liters of that wine there is. This is also something that through, in the case of Argentina, there's a national wine board. Every country has their different ways of doing it. But we basically have to say, in this tank, there's 7,500 liters of Malbec, Petit Verdot, Cabernet Sauvignon blend from these different vineyards, and here's some traceability. So that's already integrated in that, right? So as soon as we know the amount of wine there is, we do a VCO, a vintage coin offering, and we've been doing it every year on the 6th of May. This is our 6th vintage to do it. And basically, we put up for sale in a crowd sale on a contract. We've been doing this on Ethereum mainnet. Obviously, this is a problem. We're now switching over to Optimism as an L2 for the wineries going forward because of gas fees. But essentially, we put up 50% or up to 50% of the tokens in a crowd sale at a very low price, a cost price. And this is basically an interesting from the winery's perspective because they can immediately recoup some of their investment on something that usually they're going to have to wait at least 3 years, 2-3 years before those bottles are ready to consume. From the 6th of May to the 25th of July, we have this crowd sale running. 25th of July, we activate a liquidity pool. We're just using Uniswap V2 right now, where we put up 25% of the tokens into liquidity pool. And now anybody that wants to continue buying the tokens or sell the tokens or do whatever they want has a way to buy and sell. And the point being here that, yep, it's another token. It's a small volume, small liquidity token. But hey, it's backed by a bottle of wine. And so it's never going to go to zero, and it's never going to go to 1 million, right? It's going to find its spot, which is basically what people say, this is what this wine is worth, right? So who's buying these tokens? Consumers, people that are, a lot of the people that have never been in crypto before, they're like, oh, I want to find out how this works. I'm taking a risk here, but it's a bottle of wine, I'll drink it. Also importers, distributors, retailers, people that say, I could come in and out of these positions easily. And once the redeem period is ready, so in the case of my wines, this is after 3 years, but the tokenomics could be different for every winery. Basically, they go back to our DApp, OpenVino exchange, and they can do a redeem and basically say, how many bottles do you want to redeem? Give me your address, and at that point, we calculate what the shipping cost is going to be, and burn their tokens and send the bottles. And so this is how we are, over time, reducing the pool of tokens. We have a full life cycle, in our case, 10 years of validity. So if you lost your wallet, if you forgot about it, 10 years goes by, yep, well, you lost those bottles. But it also means that because there's a relationship there, you could say, somebody, you know, I've had a lot of people that say, hey, I lost my wallet. I bought these tokens. I say, do you know the wallet address? I look, I go, yep, it hasn't moved in 1,156 days. I know you, or whatever, I'll ship the wine to you. So I could even respect that as a voluntarily from the winery, because we're talking about real people and a real product, and we're using this as a mechanism for pricing and creating liquidity. Okay. The second question about traceability, I mentioned we do it with, today we're getting experts to qualify our wines. Essentially here what we're doing is putting on the back label a serialized QR code. So every QR code is different, and enabling somebody, if they want to read it, scan it, go to a site, provide information, provide feedback, answer 5 questions about their drinking experience, take a selfie with the bottle. So super invasive in their dinner. But it's essentially becomes we mint an NFT for them. Just this afternoon, we're moving this over to Optimism, and so it's a gasless transaction. And minting an NFT, so it's kind of a POAP token, a POAP token of your wine drinking experience. What we're missing on this slide and what we want to add to this, and the thing that actually makes it useful beyond this, is giving them an OpenVino DAO token, which we'll be releasing in next year. Now, I'll mention the construction of the DAO. I think we're doing a DAO that's completely different from any DAO you've ever seen in the reason of utility. What it actually does, it's not just managing the treasury with votes of speculators. But the idea, the concept here is we want to say, if you're going to share your feedback, your information, good or bad, you should get something out of it, right? You've taken already the leap of ingesting into your body the product that I make. And so I'm saying, if you want to talk about it, great, we'll make you part of the organization. You drink it, you own it, right? That's the concept. So the last part, which has to do with the transparency, is what we call biodigital certification. Basically, it's enabling a bunch of different data points that can come from IoTs, from different sensors, cameras, images, work logs, etc. But the question here is basically for a winery that says, hey, I want to certify as organic. I don't want to pay a third party. That's what I described earlier, right? Because that money that I'm paying to a certifier doesn't make my wine taste any better, right? So basically we have three pillars. One is describing what it is, the certification, what is organic, right? It's 27 things. These are things that are already, in most cases, legislated or documented. It's just describing them in a concise manner. The second is saying how is the proof of artifacts for this? So how can they match this to sensor data, to work logs, to applications or things that can be provided in real time. So it's not the spreadsheet that I uploaded the night before. It's an app that we give for the 25 different tasks that are happening in a vineyard and in a winery throughout the year. It's a drop-down application, very simple for pretty much anybody that's working in the wine industry to use. You don't have to know anything. It's like, okay, we're harvesting today, we're pruning, we're, like I said, there's only a small collection of things that get done over and over every year, right? So this is their way of proving what it is that they're doing. But where it gets interesting is in the third stage. So this is basically working with Kledos and with the platform project that's called The Badge that you might have heard of, thebadge.xyz. And basically this is where the winery says, okay, we want to be organic. Here's what organic means. Here's our arguments. We're going to stake 5,000 for 30 days. And if anybody wants to challenge us on it, you can also stake and you can upload your arguments, your evidence of why we're cheaters, and then we go to the Kledos court, they vote on it, and either I get the 5,000 back and a digital badge, or don't, right? So this is basically changing the dynamics of certification. So the idea is here, it's not just something that benefits the wineries. They do have the advantage in certain things like getting money in advance, being able to have more flexible pricing. Right? Right now, when you set the price for a bottle of wine, you're stuck in that price. It's very difficult to change, but if you could say, hey, this is market driven, it goes up and down, this isn't me, this is just what the world decided the price. It's a legitimate, real price. You're paying the market price, right? So there's different kinds of benefits to this. So the idea here, obviously, is to use the power of things that actually make sense to do on a blockchain, on a public blockchain. A couple of other different things. We'd like to go towards, obviously, like everybody, a more decentralized app. I was just talking to Andre. I didn't see his talk yesterday, but about how you could do a more decentralized app. But one thing we are working on is basically what we're calling a NetraBrick, but it's a DApp node. I'm sure you're all familiar with DApp node. But it's basically a DApp node with the radio antennas for collecting LoRa and collecting 433 megahertz, which is where we're collecting the data for the sensors in the winery and in the field. So since there is an edge IoT need for a device, right? Could be a Raspberry Pi, but since there is a need for some device in the winery, we're saying, well, okay, let's just create that black box device that's actually a Ethereum node, IPFS node, and collecting the data that we're publishing for IoT. Aggregated using a platform called Blook.com on-chain. So basically the idea here is they have a reason, an interest for actually running a node. It's not just like, oh, hey, how cool to run a DApp node. It's actually something that makes sense to use it and can be actually a platform for decentralizing the front end as well. And then for everybody that scans it and wants to get their POAP token of their drinking session, their experience, it's like a super easy way for somebody that doesn't know anything to mint their first NFT of the party that they're having with their friends. So that's basically how it works. Right now we're at the stage where I've spent the last 6 years putting this together based on the stuff in my winery. We've been wanted to start last year with other wineries. We pushed it back a year because of the merge and FTX and lots of bad press. And basically, the challenge here is not to, obviously we're not doing anything super sophisticated here and minting, you can imagine our contracts are pretty basic. What's sophisticated is sitting down with the wineries, doing a workshop. We do a 3-day workshop or a 4-day workshop where we go, okay, how does this affect your accounting? How does this affect your legal question? How do you deal with your sales force? How are they going to interpret it? How is this marketing? How are you going to message it? What's your landing page going to look like? What's your tokenomics going to be? How would this affect pricing of your current wines? And so basically it's melding those two worlds of expertise in the wine world and Web3 and saying, okay, here's a playbook to do this. And so what we want to do is between 5 and 10 wineries in the next year, mostly in Argentina, but not exclusively, do some in Spain as well, to do their tokenization with the objective as of a network effect to get to 300 wineries within 5 years. And this is all based on doing a specific type of a DAO. Now, I mentioned this before. I know there's a lot of reaction today about, oh, okay, there's so many things that can go wrong with the DAO. But basically, if I had to boil it down to an essence, it's not just about collecting people's money and saying, here's a vote, and you can vote on the protocol and decisions that are made with the treasury. It's saying to the wineries, you want to use OpenVino to tokenize, to do free self-certification, and to generate all this data from your customers. It's free. There's no charge for it. There's no licensing. It's absolutely free. But you need to be a member of the DAO. The first 300 wineries, here's some DAO tokens we'll invite you to be. Right? You want to provide services. You want to connect the ERP to support their ERP platform to support a different type of a currency or a token or whatever. You want to provide that service to wineries? Fine, you need to be a member of the DAO. And so with the yellow quarter here, basically a quarter of the tokens is designed to be the ones that we're burning every time somebody scans a bottle. For you drink it, you own it. And also for wineries that we're onboarding as an incentive pool. So there's actually a reason to be part of a gated community, be it Discord or whatever tool we want to use, but basically saying if you want to use these types of tools, you can have access to them for free, but you need to be a part of the DAO. Of course, being part of the DAO gives you a stream of the dividend of any of the income, but it also gives you some voting rights. Now, exactly how we're going to do that, that's what we're still working on. But this is about creating utility for the token of the DAO itself. So it's not just about creating another token to speculate with. So I'll just give you an example here. This is a project that I've been working on for 3 years, biofabrication. And basically, if you think about the winemaking process, when you make wine, you end up with a mountain of sticks every winter when you prune back the vines. You end up with all the stems that you don't use, and you end up with the seeds and skins that after the crush, you have a big pile of this, and there's really don't have an application for any of these. There's a couple of things, but for the most part, they either get burned or buried or thrown away somewhere. So what we do is we're basically taking the pruning, shredding it to the consistency of like a tea, putting it into a mold, inoculating this with the mycelium strain that we've identified that works really well with this particular substrate. And within 5 days, you have a box that looks like these. It basically looks like styrofoam. It's felty on the inside. It's like glass on the outside. It's quite rigid. It's lightweight. It has a lot of the properties. And it's basically 3 ingredients. It's vineyard waste plus mushrooms equals a box. Sorry? No. As soon as we give it a 75, 80 degrees Celsius heat, and this kills the mycelium. And it's also not a mycelium that's interested in cork, right? It's not a fungi that's yeah, some could be, but it's not a fungal strain that has an effect on cork anyway. So here's an interesting thing to say, okay, this makes a lot of sense. You've got this bio waste in a vineyard, and we can make boxes out of it. And by the way, wine is grape juice plus yeast, which is a fungus, equals wine, right? And so we're just basically making the box using the same ingredients, right? The same sticks, the same pruning from Malbec, Cabernet Sauvignon, Petit Verdot, in my case, end up being the packaging. Now, think about this. I can go to in Mendoza, in Argentina, and say, well, let's find a big warehouse, buy a bunch of equipment, go out and collect people's pruning materials from their vineyards, bring it there, process it, come up with 35 different SKUs of boxes, have a big warehouse full of boxes made out of mycelium, hire some people to sell them back to the wineries, ship these big 3D boxes back to them. And is that going to work? Well, maybe. It's not very scalable, right? Have to do that in each country. The second way is to say, all right, winery, if you want to use this, we'll give you the information on how to do it, and we'll hook you up with the people that provide the base spawn that you need and set up the molds and everything. But you need to sign a licensing agreement, and for every 1,000 boxes that you make, you need to pay us X amount, and we've got a patent on it and everything. Well, now I've just turned the company into a patent defenders and chasing, paying a lot of legal fees, and this is boring as well. So the third way to do is to say, okay, anybody wants to do this, we will share this information on how to do it. We'll have a community of the people that can provide the spawn, because you don't need to have that set up in every one of the wineries, right? You don't need to have the person that designs or prints out the mold in each one of the wineries. So you have the providers for certain inputs, you have the mycologists that are doing some support and some back end, and say the only thing that we require is that you're a member of the DAO. And if you're a member of the DAO, then you can be within this gated community of providers and services and participate in it, and that's how you fund this type of development. So that's basically it. We also do something called Vinophonics, which is kind of fun. This is an analog synthesizer based on the ARP 2600, which is from 1971. The flat panel in front of it is called a Vinophonics, and this is something that a friend and I built. Basically what it does is takes the sensor data from the vineyard that goes on-chain. So in this box, there's a little node, basically. I'm reading the sensor data. On the left, I've got some sliders, and those are motorized, so they actually move on their own. And so you can map that to different data. So you could say, slider 1 is temperature that goes from 0 to 35 degrees Celsius, right? Which would be from 0 to 10 on the slider position. Wind speed, temperature, humidity. We have soil sensors throughout the vineyard, all the different kinds of things that basically are making these potentiometers move on their own, and then put those into patches into an analog synthesizer. So basically it's going from the vineyard to the sensors to blockchain to Vinophonics, and then you can stream that, and you make a derivative evolutive music from vineyard data from stuff on chain. Absolutely essential if we're going to go to our final step, of course, which is to have prepared everything for doing winery on Mars, because we need red wine for a red planet. So thank you very much. This is a OpenVino. There's some of our data there if we have any questions. And then when we finish, we'll be over here drinking for as long as you like.
What's the cost of shipping a bottle of wine from Europe?
So it's the way we work with shipping. So shipping wine, the logistics of wine is very complicated, right? Part of the way that the initial design of the OpenVino exchange, by the way, not the current iteration, but the initial one, was a fork of Unisocks. And so when Hayden and Uniswap people did Unisocks, I thought this is great, but it's very easy to ship socks. Wine is heavy, it's alcohol, it's highly controlled. So if you think about even in the EU is a common market. a common customs market, except for alcohol, cigarettes, and fuel, right? Now, having said that, you can ship a few cases from Spain to Prague, and it's not a big deal. But if you're doing large volumes, then the customs is going to say, hey, you have to import this into the Czech Republic. So basically, the way it works is pricing is based on where you're shipping to. And so, for example, as long as we have a importer in the US, in Brazil, in Argentina, one or two places in the EU, those marketplaces are covered. And actually, the cost of shipping the wine from, in my case, Argentina to the EU, we define the price of the bottle as the VCO price, the vintage coin offering price, the initial price, right? This is really interesting because basically what we're doing is segregating the value of a physical object, right? You can't export at zero cost. You have to put a price on something that has import duties, excise taxes, all kinds of things on top of that. But the higher that price is, the higher the multiplier is. But as long as we segregate the price from the physical object to the digital object, to the token, right? There is no import of the token. So if the token is at $50, it doesn't matter. When we do the delivery, we're basically saying the importer that we work with says, okay, we'll import these bottles, and the fulfillment is basically them receiving it, shipping it to the end destination, to the consumer. But the base price, which everything is taxed at, is based on the initial price of the vintage coin offering.
So if 10,000 people want to ship one bottle each, ship it to the distributor first, and then they can...
Exactly. Within a range where it's not so expensive to ship it. I mean, shipping, so for right now we have, my wine is in Barcelona, where we're shipping it through. But it could be through anywhere, right? So to ship from Barcelona to Prague is not such a big deal. To ship from Argentina to Prague is huge. That's like $300 a bottle, right? Because you have to go through all the paperwork of importing, exporting that particular bottle. It's not just like shipping a pair of socks. But it does have an interesting effect in that I'm going to speak in Mexico next week, and I have a lot of people that bought a bunch of tokens in Mexico, and I don't have an importer in Mexico. Right? But I can go to an importer in Mexico and say, hey, listen, you've never tasted my wine, you don't want another wine, you're not interested in another wine, you get 67 emails a day from the 70,000 wineries in the world offering you wine. You're not interested, I get it, but I already have 800,000 bottles that are tokenized here in the country, and those people want to redeem them. Do you want to get a 15% cut just to receive it to do the forwarder? Right? And if you want to participate, you can buy tokens at a good price and resell them at the fiat price that you like, right? So it's not about eliminating the fiat supply chain. It's because people will still go into the shop and buy and have no idea about tokenization, and they'll pay for it in pesos or dollars or euro, right? There will be a differentiation between the price they pay in the shop and what they would find on the exchange. Yeah, could be. But guess what? Wine is also one of those products that you already pay 2 or 3 times as much in a restaurant, and you know that you're paying more than that, and you're like, yeah, but I want it right now, so I don't care, right? And if you're a consumer and you read the back label and you scan it and you get your NFT and you go, well, what's this all about? I want to buy the token. Well, now we've gone direct to the consumer. So, my annual production depends on the year, weather and whatnot, but roughly 10 to 15,000 bottles a year. So, no, it's tiny. But basically, I could tokenize my entire production since 2018, showing how this works. Understanding in 2018, we didn't have Uniswap. We didn't have MetaMask that you could send an ERC20 token with, right? We didn't have a whole lot of things. So we've gone through this whole arc of discovering this and presenting to it. And basically, we haven't done any marketing to wineries yet. Just the ones that have come and said, hey, we want to do that. We see the value in it, right? It's a very old industry, a very traditional industry. But like I said about the case in Jerez de la Frontera, when you walk into a winery and you say, you have a fortune of wine sitting here, it's been sitting here for 100 years, but it's basically worthless until you sell it, tokenize it. And they go, yeah, we get that, so let's do it. So that's why we have to make things simpler, more attractive, and whatnot. That's the real challenge, and making sure that internally in the wineries, they see this as an advantage and not a threat. And some of them won't be interested in it, some of them will, but there's so many out there that it doesn't matter.
Is there any actual link between bottle and token? Maybe a legal link or something like this, or it's just like people have, like, I mean, when it's only unit producer, then it's easy, people just know you and they just do it. It's not trustless, of course.
Yeah.
But, if there will be like 300 producers, what link will be between token and their bottle? What will ensure that they will send me the bottle? Or
Okay, yeah.
if they even have this bottle, because there is obviously no proof of reserves.
Well, actually, that's a really good question. So there's a couple of different aspects here that can be done. For example, the National Wine Board in Argentina, who every country is a little bit different. They have a registry of which wineries actually exist, and the wines that actually exist. And they have an online service that can do authentication. So basically, we went to them and said, look, we don't want your access to your data. We don't want you to do anything for us. All we want to do is when a winery, and when we have a provisioning tool, an automated provisioning tool to tokenize your wines, all I'm going to do is say, okay, you're an Argentine winery. What's your winery number? That will take them to the wine board that will do a login and password and come back and say, yep, you authenticated with them, so I believe that you're the winery, right? Now, give me the analysis number of the wine. And then I look up that in the database and go, okay, there's 6,700 liters of that particular wine that exists, and it's 14.2% alcohol, and it's Merlot Cabernet Franc, and all of that sort of information, right? So there is a way that we can validate that the wine actually exists and that the winery actually exists. The next thing is to say, well, how do I know that they're actually going to send it to their customers? Well, this isn't a DeFi platform that has contact telephone. No, these are companies that exist and many times for decades or even centuries. And so as soon as they don't fulfill the tokens delivery, I mean, that's obviously, it's a reputational cost. It's very high for them. It would affect the cost, the valuation of the token. So that's kind of the guarantee on that point. The third aspect, which is getting a bit sci-fi, but I was talking to Vinay about this earlier, is working with a company that's developed a non-invasive spectrometer, which basically allows you to identify a liquid in a bottle with a label and a cork, right? And create a spectrographic profile. And so what I want to do with that is to say, winery, you're going to tokenize your wine, send me 12 bottles. We'll scan the 12 bottles and say, okay, this is a spectrographic profile for this particular wine/token. And if we have a handful of those devices in the world, one in Europe, one in China, where there's a big fraud problem with wines, one in the US and one someplace else, the customer that's buying a container, half a container, pallet of wine, right, and says, is this really the same wine that they tokenize? All they have to do is take any bottle off the pallet, stick it in a box, push a button, and go, the liquid inside is X. Okay. So at least they know that's the same thing that they're getting, which today, by the way, they don't know. There's a huge amount of fraud about that. About, are you actually getting the wine that was written up, that you tasted in the fair, that you ordered? So if I have a Chinese buyer that comes and we meet in Vinexpo in Paris, or one of these big events, they might taste it and say, okay, that's great, I'll buy it. How much is it? And I'll say 7 and 4, 5, 3. We negotiate a price. Between that point and when they actually receive a container or a pallet in Shanghai, it's going to be minimum 6 months. Just because of the complexity of registering labels and shipping, all these things that have, like again, we're not dealing socks. And now you're sitting in your office in Shanghai and you open a bottle and you go, is that the stuff that Mike made me try there and I liked it and we agreed, or did he just ship me something else? I have no way of knowing, right? Might have changed, in which case I want to know, oh, did it change because of the product? Did it change because it's a different product? Is it just, I don't like it today, but I liked it, but maybe I'll like it next week, right? Yeah, did it get hot and did it get cooked when it was transporting? I mean, there's all different kinds of questions that you could actually resolve with this, right? And adding different layers of complexity to it, of how do I trace the actual tokenization with a physical product using a technology like that, right? But, you know, we can solve so many problems just as it is that we don't have to go full bore at the first stage. But yeah, that's the thought. Let's go drink.